little apprehensive because what I'm going to tell you is what I think is the main message of Chanukah. But I gave this year in this exact same place a few years ago. I assume that many of you were not here, but I'm afraid that the reason they let me give this year again is because I heard of a chazan who gave a performance, and after he finished his last song, they asked for an encore, so he sang it a second time. When he finished it a second time, they asked for another encore, so he sang it a third time. After 7 times of asking for encores, he said, "I'm really flattered that you want to hear this song over and over, but how many times?" And someone in the back yelled out, "Till you do it right." So I hope this time I'll do it right and you won't have to hear it again. Okay, I want to start with 2 introductions, prefaces, to what I'm going to speak about that are necessary to understand before you can deal with Chanukah and its message and any other similar like Purim, Pesach, or whatever. The first is from last week's Sedra. The Gemara in Shabbos has 2 ideas that it brings out, one right after the other, who are said by the same person, but that's not enough reason for 2 things to be put together in the Gemara. The first one is Ner Chanukah sheinicha l'mala mi'esrim ama psula. If you put the Chanukah candles higher than 20 amas, about 40 feet off of ground level, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. And right after that, the Gemara says, Habor reik ein bo mayim, the pit that they threw Yosef into was empty of water. It says it was empty and there was no water. So the Gemara says, after it was empty, there was no water. But the Torah is telling you it was empty of water, but not empty of other things. There were snakes and scorpions, poisonous snakes and scorpions in the pit. The obvious question is, what do these 2 things have to do with each other? Why are they put together in the Gemara? What I think is the following. The Gemara says that if you see someone fall into a pit which you know has poisonous snakes and scorpions in it, and you don't see what happened to him, you can assume for sure that he's dead. Because even though snakes and scorpions don't always attack people, but when people fall on them, they don't take too kindly to that and they attack back. And therefore you can go and testify that the man is dead and his wife can remarry, for sure. If that's the case, then when they threw Yosef into a pit with snakes and scorpions, he should have been killed. And it was an open miracle that he wasn't killed. Now, there is a mitzvah to publicize miracles. So why did the Torah only hint in such an obscure way to tell me that Yosef was thrown into a pit with snakes and scorpions? Why didn't the Torah publicize that miracle? In big letters. Nes gadol hayakan. Yosef was thrown into a pit with snakes and scorpions and survived. Why did the Torah only hint to it in an obscure way and not publicize it openly? I think the answer is because publicizing miracles is not to publicize that God can do good tricks. Because whatever miracle it is, God can always do better. What are you going to tell me? Oh, God could save people from snakes and scorpions. Big deal. He could make people. He could make snakes and scorpions. He can make them disappear. What is the big deal that he can save a human being who falls on snakes and scorpions? That's all God can do. God can make oil burn 8 days. Big deal. He can make the oil. He can make water burn 8 days. He can make it burn 8 years. What is the... So we're not saying that God can do good tricks. Because in essence, if that's all God can do, that detracts from the greatness of God. So why do we publicize miracles? Because sometimes we need a message. And God knows that if he doesn't attract our attention with something that is out of the ordinary, we won't get the message. So therefore, publicizing miracles is not to let me know that God can do good tricks, but rather to get the message across that that miracle is supposed to convey. And therefore, a miracle that no one learns anything from, where the message didn't get across, there's no mitzvah to publicize it, just the opposite. Better to hide it. And therefore, the Torah did not publicize this miracle because nobody learned anything from it. Either the brothers knew that there were snakes and scorpions and ignored it, or they didn't know. Either way, nothing was ever learned from this miracle, and therefore the Torah does not publicize it. And now you can understand why, if the Chanukah candles are higher than 20 amos from ground level, there's no mitzvah. You're not fulfilling the mitzvah of publicizing the miracle. Why? You can see 40 feet in the air, but it's not in your line of vision. When the Chanukah menorah is in your line of vision, you see it constantly, you can think about it, and you can then think about the message that it's supposed to tell you. But if you only see it intermittently, every once in a while you look up, then you're only going to be impressed with the miracle. That is not called publicizing miracles. And therefore you don't fulfill the mitzvah. So the first preface is that if we really want to publicize the miracle of Chanukah properly, you have to understand what the message is. What is it trying to tell us? And it seems like that message is eternal, because it says in the Avanisim, La'amcha Yisrael osita sheshua gedola ufurkon kayom hazeh. The Jewish people benefited a tremendous redemption till today. What till today? There's no more Beis HaMikdash. There's no more Greece. What is this redemption till today? What it means is that the lesson that Chanukah conveys exists even till today and is necessary till today. So that miracle exists today because the message of the miracle exists today. The second preface. Imagine somebody walking down the street, minding his own business, and somebody comes with an iron pole and breaks both his legs. And now he's writhing in pain on the sidewalk with both legs broken. And the person with the iron pole comes over him and says, I mean you no harm. I'm just an orthopedic surgeon who needs practice. So I broke both your legs. I'm going to take you to my clinic. I'm going to set the bones. I'm going to heal you. And in 6 months, you're going to be walking like nothing ever happened. And I'm not going to charge you a penny. How much of a thank you does he owe that orthopedic surgeon? Zero. He owes him a lawsuit. Why? Because if you didn't break my legs, I'd be walking like nothing ever happened 6 months earlier, because nothing would have happened. Don't break my legs and don't heal me. We believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs this world, not Antiochus and not Paro and not Haman. And therefore, if something happens that is a tragedy, it's because God wants it to happen for some reason. Because if he didn't want it to happen, he would have stopped the evil people who wanted to perpetrate it from doing it. So if it happens, that does not exonerate the evil people from getting punished, because their intention was to do bad. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have prevented it. He could have stopped them. If he didn't, that means there's a reason why he wanted that to happen, why he let it happen. So who got us in to the tragedy of Antiochus? God. Who took us out of that tragedy? God. Why do we thank him? Don't break my legs. Don't heal me. You got me into the Torah. You took me out of it. Why do we have to thank the Rabbanu Shalom? He broke my legs. He heals me. Why do I have to thank him? I didn't come here to convince you to stop celebrating Chanukah. So there must be an answer. The answer is that my mashal is not a good one. And now I'll tell you the real mashal. Imagine a disease of the legs, which I made up, but I have a right to make up any marshal I want, even to make up diseases. That's part of my condition over here of speaking. So the disease has the following pathology. It incubates in the bones of your legs for 10 years, and you don't even know you have it. Only an expert in this disease can see from the way a person's walking that he has a disease. Exactly to the second of 10 years, the bones of the leg disintegrate, and the person is a cripple the rest of his life. No cure. There's only one cure to this disease. If you catch it before the 10 years are up, and you break the person's legs and reset the bones, they'll grow back healthily. Now let's go back to the guy walking down the street, minding his own business. Behind him is an orthopedic surgeon who is an expert in this disease. And he sees from the way the person's walking that he has a disease. And not only that, there's exactly 5 minutes left till the 10 years is up. In 5 minutes, this person's bones are going to disintegrate, and he'll be a cripple the rest of his life with no chance of a cure. So what does he do? He grabs a metal pole, breaks the guy's legs pronto, and tells him, "You're a very lucky man." He said, "Can you explain to me why I'm a lucky man with 2 legs broken?" He said, "Yeah. Because if I didn't break your legs, in 5 minutes you would be a cripple for life. I broke your legs, I'm going to take you to my clinic, I'm going to set the bones, and in 6 months you're going to be walking like nothing ever happened, and I'm going to charge you for it." And he does that. And 6 months later, he's walking like nothing ever happened. Does he owe a thank you to that orthopedic surgeon now? Yeah. For what? For healing him, or for breaking his legs also, which is part of the process of the healing process. He has to thank him also for breaking his legs. Sometimes we, as a people, but as individuals too, but right now we're talking about Klal Yisrael as a people, we make ourselves sick spiritually. And we need our legs broken in order to be healed. And God knows that if things just continue the way they are, the result will be tragic. And therefore, he brings us into some tzara, which is the breaking of the legs that enables now the cure to take place. So therefore, the Shari Tshuva says that when a person goes through some kind of tragedy and he is redeemed from it and he's saved from it, he has to thank God not only for the redemption, he has to thank him for the tragedy too. Because if you don't understand that the tragedy was needed, then there's no reason to thank God for the redemption. Don't break my legs and don't heal me. And I think that the word nes, which usually is a miracle that accompanies some kind of sorrow, some kind of tragedy that the miracle now saves you from, is comprised of 2 letters, Nun and Samech. The Gemara in Bracha says there's no Nun in Ashrei because David did not want to hint to the word Nefila, falling. Nafla v'lo sosif kum. So he left out the Nun. And instead, right away afterwards, he said, Somech Hashem l'chol hanoflim. The Samech means to support. God supports those that fall. So every Nes hints to both things. The Nefila, the fall itself, and the idea of support after the fall. That's what a nes is. So that's the second, and that's why the Sfas Emes says that on Chanukah there's 2 kinds of thanksgiving. There's Hallel, which we say in thank you for the redemption, and there's Hoda'ah, which we say in recognition and in admission that we needed that sorrow. We needed our legs broken. We needed to get into that sorrow of Yavan. So those are the 2 prefaces. In order to really discuss Chanukah, you have to know what the miracle conveys, what are we supposed to learn from it, and not only what to learn from it, but what to learn from the tzara too that accompanied that redemption, that preceded that redemption. So let's start and understand what the tzara of Yavan was. If you look at the Avanisim of Chanukah and the Avanisim of Purim, they structurally are parallel. How does they both start? Purim starts, B'may Mordechai ve'Esther b'Shushan Abira. It introduces the period of time that we're talking about and who are the righteous people who were involved. Same thing by Chanukah. B'may Matisyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol Chashmonai uvanav. We're told it's a time when there was a Beis Hamikdash, there was a Kohen Gadol, and who the tzaddikim were, Matisyahu and the Chashmonaim. Okay, now we introduce the period and the tzaddikim, who were the bad guys. Kishamar aleim Haman Rasha. Haman is introduced. Same thing over here. Kisham the Malchus Yavan Harishal Amcha Yisrael. The Avanim, they're the bad guys. They're introduced. Okay, now we know the period of time. We know who the good guys were. We know who the bad guys were. What did the bad guys want to do? They made problems. Bikesh, it says by Purim, he sought lahashmid laharogulav. He wanted to annihilate us. That's what Haman wanted to do. What should be the next word in the Avanisim of Chanukah? Bikshu lashkicham. They wanted to make us forget the Torah. Doesn't say that. It doesn't say they wanted to make us forget the Torah. It says lahashkicham Torasecha, to make us forget the Torah. When the evil empire of Yavan arose, to make us forget the Torah. It doesn't say they wanted to make us forget the Torah, like it says by Haman, he wanted to annihilate us. I think the answer is the following. The Torah of Haman began when he made his decree to annihilate the Jewish people. That was the Torah, his decree. The day before he decreed anything against us, there was no problem. The problem was what Haman wanted to do to us. But the Torah of Yavan was not what they wanted to do to us. Because way before the Greeks made any decrees against us, they already were a threat. How do I know that? Because there were many Jews who became Hellenists, Misyavnim, before the Greeks made any active decrees against us. Yavan presented a threat, not because of what they wanted to do, but because of what they were. Haman presented a threat because of what he wanted to do, not what he was. That's the difference. So now we need to know what was the threat of Yavan. Why is Yavan, just their emergence as a world power, a threat to the Jewish people before they had any designs against us, before they made any decrees against us? In order to understand that, we have to go back to the beginnings of society after the flood. Noah had 3 children, Shem, Ham, and Yefes. The Maral explains that they were the foundations of the various aspects of society, of civilization. Yefes, beauty, grandeur, represented the foundation, the physical foundation, the physical plant, the infrastructure of society, physical. Yefes and his descendants were supposed to create the infrastructure of society, the physical body of society. Shem was supposed to inject in that physical plant holiness, just like a body and a soul. If you don't have a body, a soul can't exist in this world. It can exist in the spiritual world, not in the physical world. So if the body isn't there, there's no more soul here. Soul has to go somewhere else. A soul can't exist in this physical world without a body. So the body and the soul are partners. They work together. And that's what Yefes and Shem should have been. Yaft Elokim Yefes, that's what Noah said. Yaft Elokim Yefes, let God beautify and enlarge Yefes, the physical plant. The Yishkon be all they Shem, but he should dwell together in the tents of Shem and incorporate within him the holiness that Shem produces in the world. And now you have the body of the world and the soul of the world. But the body and the soul need drives, appetites to move it. That's Cham, heat, energy. Cham represents the drives and the appetites that move the body and the soul. And therefore Noah said, Cham, Eved Avodim Yeliechav. He should be a slave to his other brothers. Because if the appetites and drives are not subjugated to the body and the soul, they can destroy both of them. You can overeat, and you can do terrible sins, destroy your soul and destroy your body. So the drives, the heat, the energy has to be subjugated to the body and the soul, a slave to the two other brothers, the one that represents the body, Yefes, and the one that represents the soul. Now, if Yefes and Shem and their descendants had worked in tandem together as partners, that would have been fine. In fact, we learn from this pasuk that you can write a Sefer Torah in the old Greek alphabet when it was used in the world. Today it doesn't apply. And the Sefer Torah will have holiness. The holiness of Shem is coupled with the beauty and physical letters of Greece. That's the ideal. Yavan was the main ancestor of Yefes. And Klal Yisrael were the main ancestor of Shem. We could have worked together with them, but Yavan decided to totally negate any inner spiritual value to this world. They only believed in externals, external wisdom, not revealed wisdom, what the Torah is, just logic, external wisdom. What you can get with your own brain, nothing else exists. External beauty, external might, power, riches, they represented a totally external view of the world. That was Yavan. And I think the name Yavan hints to that. How do you spell Yavan? Yud, Vav, Nun. Those three letters are only lines. They have no inside. They're totally external letters. Not only that, but when you appraise the world physically, physical world, you appraise it by quantity. How much is there? And when you appraise the world from a spiritual standpoint, there's no such thing as quantity, it's quality. In the physical quantified world, there are three quantities, generic: small, medium, large. That's Yavan. Small Yud, medium-sized Vav, large Nun. Three lines in the three generic sizes of quantity. That's Yavan. In addition, those three lines are parallel. They never meet. Because in a physical world, everything has its own parameters. There's no achdus. There's no unity. What unifies things is a spiritual aspect. So Yavan is three lines with no inside, just lines in three generic sizes of small, medium, and large that never meet. There's never any unity between them. So Yavan represents the total external view of the world. Now, the Jewish people, why were they vulnerable to this influence of Yavan? To look at the world in a totally external way and to live a life of externals. So there are two ways of approaching the Torah. We're talking about people now who believe in the Torah and who keep mitzvahs. But there are two ways of approaching it. One way is to look at the Torah as an external thing, bunch of do's and don'ts. Do this, don't do that. And if you keep the rules, then you pass go and get a share in the world to come. But it's a totally external view of the Torah. And then there's avodas Hashem. You are totally, avodah means to be totally subjugated to the Torah, where your lifestyle, your values, your goals, and your entire personality is molded by the Torah. That's an inner look at the Torah, right? That's a more spiritual look at the Torah. It's not just a bunch of do's and don'ts, but it's a way of life. There are many Jews, that's what the Bach says, who were nisrashlu ba'avodas Hashem. They were derelict when it came to that subjugation to God, that inner value, which is represented by the avodah, the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash represented the Beis Hashem, the house of God. The whole religion is a home. It's a place where you mold your values, your standards, your goals, your personality. There's an inner idea to Torah and mitzvahs. It's not just a bunch of do's and don'ts. Jews that only saw the externals of Torah and Yiddishkeit were very impressed and influenced by the externals of Greece, because the externals of Torah can't compete with the externals of Greece. The externals of Greece are more beautiful, they're more powerful, they're greater than the externals of Torah. But Jews who saw the inner value of a Torah life, of Torah values, Torah goals, or whatever, you excuse the pun, but Greece can't hold a candle to the inner values of Torah. So Jews who appreciated the inner values of Torah were not affected by the Greeks. They weren't impressed or influenced. But Jews who looked at the Torah in a very external way were very much overawed, influenced by the externals of Greece, which had the Torah beat hands down. And many of them gave up the Torah in order to adopt a Greek Hellenistic lifestyle. Now, the Chafetz Chaim says a rule, not necessarily talking about Chanukah, but in general. He says that when people don't appreciate what they have, one of the ways that God makes them appreciate it or initiates an appreciation is by having it taken away from them or by having it threatened to be taken away. That's human nature. When you have something, you take it for granted. When it's taken away from you or it's threatened to be taken away, all of a sudden you want it and you appreciate it. Many people do not appreciate their parents until they're no longer here in this world. Then they begin to appreciate them. And therefore, because the Rebbeinu Shalom saw that we were spiritually sick and a good portion of the Jewish people were in danger of succumbing to the influence of Greece and giving up Yiddishkeit. And if he didn't break our legs, then the result would be very, very tragic. So then the Rebbeinu Shalom permitted the Greeks, he didn't make them do it, they chose to do it for their reasons, but he permitted them to make decrees against us that threatened to take away the inner values of Yiddishkeit. The Greeks were not interested in destroying us. They were not interested also in taking away the whole Torah from us. When the Greeks conquered, they were bent on world conquest. When they conquered a nation, they allowed them to keep their own gods, to keep their own customs and folklore, as long as their way of life was Hellenistic, was Greek. As long as it didn't affect their mode of living. It's just everybody has their way of expressing it. Some have these folk customs, have different, but bottom line, they live the Greek life. That's what they wanted. So therefore, the decrees they made against the Jewish people were to take away the inner values of Judaism. And there basically were 6 different decrees. First one was lahashkicham Torasecha, to make us forget the Torah. Now, you can't forget the written Torah. It's in a book. You just open the book and you know it. What can you forget? In that time, the oral Torah was not written down. They didn't have art scroll Gemaras. Everything was by heart. Okay, you can appreciate. When you open a Chumash, it's very nice, but without any commentaries, without the oral Torah to accompany it, the written Torah is a very dry bunch of stories and do this, don't do that. It's a body without a soul. That's why the Mishnah, which is the source of Torah Shebaal Peh, has the same letters as Neshama. The Mishnah is the Neshama of the Torah. The written Torah is the body of the Torah. But the Torah Shebaal Peh is the neshama of the Torah. So they wanted to take the neshama out of the Torah. You can keep your customs, your folklore, just not have a different way of life. It's the Gemara, it's the Torah Shebaal Peh that forms the character of the Jewish people, that makes the Torah into a living thing. So that was the first decree against Torah Shebaal Peh. And then lahavira mechuke ritzonecha, to transfer us. A havara in modern Hebrew is a transfer. They wanted to transfer us from doing God's will to just doing a bunch of folk customs and folklore. So therefore they made the following gezeros, the following decrees, that took the inner values of Torah away. First, Shabbos. Why? Because the body of the world is the 6 days of creation. God created the infrastructure, the physical world. Shabbos introduces a soul, a spirituality into that infrastructure. So they said, no Shabbos. Just have the 6 days, physical world. There's no inner spiritual value to the physical world. Shabbos is the neshama of the world. Second thing was Rosh Chodesh. Time is also an entity. So they said, you can have your time, but no holiness in time. That's Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh, Kiddush HaChodesh, introduces holiness, an inner spiritual value to time. Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. God sanctifies the Jewish people and the zmanim and time through our sanctification of the new moon. And the third thing was Bris Milah. Bris Milah is the soul of the body. The body's a physical plant. What shows that that body has a connection to godliness? Bris Milah. It's an oath. It's a sign that we're connected to God. So that they wanted to take away the soul of the body, the soul of time, and the soul of the world, and leave it just externals. The Rambam adds two more things based on Midrashim. They also made a decree against Jewish money and Jewish women. The Jewish money was that any material possession that a Jew owned, a table, a stender, a book, right, a computer, whatever it may be, a camera, he had to engrave on it, Ein lanu chelik belokei Yisrael. We have no share in the God of Israel. Why? Because from a secular standpoint, money is important intrinsically. The body of the money. There are people who sacrifice their lives just to earn more money and put it in the bank. They never enjoy it. They never use it. They don't see their families, but they're rich people. They have big bank accounts. So that's important. From a Torah standpoint, money is very important, but for a different reason. The Gemara says, Tzadikim chavivim aleim amonam yosem migufan. A tzaddik, his money is more precious to him than his body. Why so much? Because he doesn't steal. The way I understand that is the following. A tzaddik understands that both his body and his material possessions were given to him by God. And they were given to him to use somehow in service of Hashem, of the Torah, of Klal Yisrael. Right? They're tools to be used in a way that promotes what God wants in this world. You can't do it without a physical body, and you can't do it without physical possessions. And therefore, both the body and the material possessions are tools to serve God. It doesn't say that they consider their money more important than their body. That's absurd. If you don't have a body, the money is useless. It says it's more precious. What makes something precious? That you put effort into it. The more effort you put into something, the more precious it is to you. So let's see. How much effort do you have to put into getting your body? None. It's a birthday present. First birthday, you got a body. Present. You have to put effort into maintaining your money and into using it. You have to put effort into maintaining your body and using it. How about money? If you steal, you may be able to get your money easily. But if you don't steal, you have to earn every penny honestly. So you have to put effort into getting your money. Then you have to put effort into maintaining it. And then you have to put effort into using it. So the body entails only 2 efforts, whereas the money entails 3 efforts. So which is more precious? Both of them are tools to be used in service of God. The one that's more precious as a tool to serve God is your money, because you put more effort into it. So therefore, the Greeks wanted to take away the inner value of money and just leave the externals. So they made us engrave on it, there's nothing to do with God. This is not God. This is just a physical plant that makes you important. And women. What were the gezeras against women? 2 things. One is that any woman who got married, before she could live with her husband and have relations with him, she had to have relations with the Greek officer of that area, which totally desecrated the holiness of marriage and reduced it to just a physical act. Her first experience was just a physical act with a stranger. And after the women got married, they could not go to the mikveh. They couldn't exercise family purity. Why? Why this gzeira against women? Because from a secular standpoint, even in this liberated and modern world, women, for the most part, are still looked upon as external objects and basically appraised on their external attributes. How do I know that? Because with all the liberation and modernity, there are still Miss America pageants, Miss Universe pageants, Miss Israel pageants. And even they say they have upgraded them, and they have the women speaking about their careers and reading their poetry. It's all done in bathing suits, which has me believe that the poetry and the careers is not the ikr. On the other hand, from a Torah standpoint, women are the foundation of Jewish holiness. And that's not just to be condescending to women, it's true. Why? Because unless you're a convert, there's only one factor that determines whether you have a holy Jewish soul or not, and that is who your mother is. Your father could have been Genghis Khan. If your mother is a plain, ordinary Jewish woman, then you have a holy Jewish neshama. And your father could have been Moshe Rabbeinu. If your mother is not a Jewish woman, then you don't have a holy Jewish soul. So the only factor that determines whether there's holiness in any Jewish person, any person, right? If you have that holiness of a Jew, is your mother. And up until recently, mothers were women. And therefore, what's it called? Women are the foundation of Jewish holiness. So therefore, the Greeks wanted to take away that inner kedusha and just leave the women desecrated and totally external. And that's why we don't find by the Greeks that they wanted to destroy us. There are 2 words that describe what the Greeks wanted to do to us. They wanted to be metame and lechalel. In English, lechalel means to desecrate, and letame means to defile. But let me tell you what they really mean. The word halal means an empty space, a vacuum. The halal hashamayim, outer space, is called halal. It's empty space. A dead body is called a halal because he's just a body and there's nothing inside. The soul has left. So he's a body with an empty space inside. A flute is called a khalil because it's hollow on the inside. In fact, my heart tells me that etymology of the word hollow is the word halal. Think about it. Ches lamed lamed H-O-L-L. Especially if you're Russian and you say halal, right? So it sounds almost like halal, exactly. So I think that lechalel means to hollow us out. And then to be matame, to defile us. Because when you have holiness in a place that's occupying a space, and the holiness is hollowed out and leaves up space, what's left is either tumah or that invites tumah. One of the two, different opinions. So that's why a person who dies is tameh, because his neshama left, and something has to fill the vacuum. What fills the vacuum is tumah. So that's what the Avanim wanted to do. They wanted to be metameh and mechalel. They wanted to hollow us out from any inner values and memela to defile us. Okay. Once the legs were broken and the decrees were made, so now Jews who didn't appreciate the inner values of Yiddishkeit began to appreciate them, like we said. When they're threatened to be taken away, or if somebody forces you to take it away from you, you begin to appreciate it. So those same Jews who were so impressed with Greek civilization, because they only saw the Torah in an external way, now began to appreciate the internals because they were being threatened to be taken away from them. And now that their legs were broken, and that began the process of healing, now the Rebbeinu Shalom said, now I can heal you. Now I can put your legs back together. So he aroused the Kohanim, the Chashmonaim, not the soldiers, not the political leaders, right, who had the physical power, but the Kohanim who had the spiritual power. Because that is going to be the lesson of Chanukah. What is the main thing in this world? The externals physical or the internal spiritual? There doesn't have to be any conflict between them. They can work very nicely together. But when there is a conflict, what is more important? The inner spiritual, not the externals. That is the message of Chanukah. And the Rebbeinu Shalom aroused the Chashmonaim. And if you think about it, the word Chashmonai has in it all the things, the letters, that represent all the decrees that the Yevanim made against us are hinted to in the name Chashmonai. Ches is Chodesh. They wanted to take away Rosh Chodesh. So Ches, the Chashmonaim, had the power of Rosh Chodesh. Shin is Shabbos. Mem is Mishnah, Mammon, and Milah. Right? All three. Bris Milah, money, and the Mishnah, Torah Sheba'al Peh. Nun is Nida. They wanted to take away family purity. Aleph is Eishes Ish. They wanted to take away and desecrate matrimony. And the Yud stands for the inner Kedusha of Klal Yisrael, the first letter of God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So that was the power of the Chashmonaim. And that was the nash of Chanukah. That when there is a conflict between the physical and the spiritual is more significant. And that's what we say in Avanisim. We say, Mosarta giborim biad chaloshim, v'rabim biad ma'atim. You gave the strong and the many into the hands of the weak and the few. Tmeim biat tahorim, the defiled in the hands of the pure. Rishoyim biat tzadikim, the wicked in the hands of the righteous. V'zeidim biat oski sorasecha. Now I understand that if the few and the weak win over the many and the strong, that's a miracle. Because api derech hateva, naturally, the strong and the many win. But I don't understand, why is it a miracle that the righteous win over the wicked? Is there some kind of unwritten natural law that righteous people always lose? And if they win, it's a miracle? Why is that part of the miracle? I think the answer is that's not what it means. We did not win because we were few and weak. We won despite the fact that we were few and weak. So why did we win? The answer is they had the physical edge. They were strong and many, but we had the spiritual edge. We were pure and righteous and involved in Torah. So when there was a conflict between the physical edge and the spiritual edge won. That is what Chanukah is all about. To understand and appreciate that the spiritual aspects of the world are more significant than the physical aspects. And that is the miracle of the oil. Tells me you don't need a lot. Quantity is not the main thing. If it's pure, a little bit can last you as long as you need it. And if it's not pure, a ton won't help. Same idea. It's the inner purity that's significant, not the quantity. And that is the same, that's the meaning of what the menorah represents, the symbol of the menorah. In this week's Haftorah, the Navi Zechariah is shown a menorah. And he's asked, do you know what it symbolizes? And he says, no. So the angel tells him, it symbolizes the following. Lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach ki im baruchi amar Hashem. It's not numbers and it's not physical strength that make the difference. It's my spirit that makes the difference. Now, how in the world does the menorah teach you that lesson? So I think perhaps the following way. The menorah was a beautiful external kli. Right? It was gold, solid gold with ornaments, beautiful. But that menorah had one purpose. Fill the cups with oil, would put a wick in, and light it, and have a flame. That means that whole beautiful physical menorah was nothing unless it had that spiritual flame burning in it. The whole purpose of that physical, beautiful menorah was for the sake of that flame, that spiritual flame. And that's what we say in the Avanisim of Chanukah. We use the word gadol, big, in 4 times in the Avanisim of Chanukah. Kohen gadol, u'lecha asisa shem gadol, u'la'amcha Yisrael asisa teshua gedola, l'hodos u'l'halel l'shimcha hagadol. In the Avanisim of Purim, the word gadol doesn't appear even 1 time. So something special about this obsession with gadol. I think perhaps in the Torah describes the ancestor of Yavan, Yefes, as gadol, Yefes hagadol. Because Yefes represented physical grandeur. He was big. Big is a description of the physical world. So he was Yefes hagadol. But we have a different conception of gadol, what's big. The Kohen Gadol, okay, how did they pick him? They measured all the Kohanim and weighed them. And all the Kohen who was the heaviest and tallest became the Kohen Gadol? No, it had nothing to do with his size. It had to do with his inner strength. The Gadol of Kohen Gadol was nothing to do with physicality. It had to do with spirituality. I remember when I was about 17, 18 years old, I had started learning in yeshiva in Cleveland. I lived in Miami, and I went to Cleveland for yeshiva. And I spent my sukkahs bein hazmanim. It was too expensive to go back to Miami for such a short time. So I spent my sukkahs bein hazmanim in New York. And in Miami, I didn't see too many Gedolei Yisrael. But in New York, there were plenty of Gedolim, especially at that time, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zatzal, was still alive. So I told my friends, take me to see Rav Moshe Feinstein. I want to see a Gadol B'Yisrael. So they took me to the Lower East Side, and as we're getting closer to Rav Moshe's yeshiva, Tiferes Yerushalayim, about a block away, they point to me and say, "Do you see that man in the distance? That's Rav Moshe Feinstein." Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein was a little guy who maybe came up to my shoulder when I was 17. And I remember thinking to myself, my God, if those are the Gedolim, what do the Ketanim look like? But he wasn't a Gadol because he was a basketball player. He was a Gadol because of his inner spiritual godless. That's what the Avanisim is telling me. Do you want to know what Gadol is? It's not what Yefes has. It's not the externals. It's internal. It's quality. It's not quantity. So that is the message of Chanukah. And I think that's the message that we give ourselves when we sing Maal Sur by our candles. Maal Sur speaks about all the empires that most of them don't exist anymore. Mitzrayim, Modai, Paras, Bavel, they don't exist. They're in the history books. They're not singing about us anywhere. And we're singing about them. They had everything physical going for them. They had land and power and money, and they don't exist anymore. And we didn't have any of that. And we're still around singing about them, and they're not singing about us. Why? Because we have those candles. We have that spiritual power. And that gave us the ability to still be here when all them, with all their physical accoutrements, are not here anymore. So that is the lesson of Chanukah. The Pirsumei Nisa of Chanukah is, don't be impressed with the externals of the world. They're important if you use them properly, but they're not the main thing. And therefore, that's what we celebrate Chanukah with. All the things that the Greeks wanted to take away from us are contained in Chanukah, every one of them, and in a more significant way. Think about it. Every Chanukah has 8 days, which hints to Bris Milah. Every Chanukah has at least one Shabbos, and sometimes 2, if Chanukah starts on Shabbos. And it's not just a plain Shabbos, it's Shabbos Chanukah. And every Chanukah has in it Rosh Chodesh, Teves. And it's not Stam Rosh Chodesh, it's the only Rosh Chodesh in the year that we say a full Hallel, because it's Chanukah. And every Chanukah has in it Chanukah geld, money, as a part of Chanukah. And women have a special part in Chanukah because they don't do work when the candles are lit. So all the things the Greeks wanted to take away from us, Milah, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, women, money, are included in Chanukah. And the same thing goes with Torah Shebaal Peh. Because there is no Masechtas Chanukah like there's Maseches Megillah. And there's not even a mention of the laws of Chanukah in the Mishnah, only in the Gemara. The Mishnah is the compendium of Torah Shebaal Peh, and the Gemara is a discussion of it. So in the Mishnah, which is Torah Shebaal Peh, it never was written down in the Mishnah, the laws of Chanukah. They remained oral. So even that is part of Chanukah. That's what Chanukah teaches me, in my estimation. That's the message you're supposed to think, and that's what the publicizing the miracle is, to publicize this message. And just to end on a lighter note, when I first moved to Eretz Yisrael about 38 years ago, there were many things here that were culturally shocking, different than American culture, Israeli culture. I'm not talking now about Frumkeit, I'm talking about just the culture of Israeli society. Many things, different than what I was used to in America. Okay, without going into detail, I'm sure everyone here who comes from either America, England, or whatever knows what I'm talking about. Okay, there are plenty of cultural differences. But one thing that really bothered me was Chanukah. Because the food of Chanukah in Chutz La'aretz is latkes. Yeah, I just heard her said that you had a whole latke party here. So you know what latkes are. When I first came here, they had a Chanukah party in my moshav, first night of Chanukah, and there wasn't one latke. You know what they served instead? Jelly donuts. Now, jelly donuts is nice for carnivals. What in the world does jelly donuts have to do with Chanukah? Okay, I figured maybe the host didn't know how to make a latke. So they got jelly donuts the last minute. Next day, another Chanukah party, jelly donuts, sufganiyot, no latkes. Second day, third day. I didn't see a latke anywhere, only jelly donuts. By the third or fourth day of Chanukah, I was driving past an army base near our moshav with an Israeli friend in the car. And there in front of the army base was a gigantic billboard with one word on it and an arrow pointing to the army base. And that one word was latkes. I said, wow, at least in the army, they have preserved the custom of eating latkes. Not only that, they publicize it. My Israeli friend said, don't get excited. That says latekes to the ceremony. That does not say latkes. But after thinking about it, the Israeli sufganiyot, the Israeli jelly donuts, really convey the message of Chanukah better than latkes. Why? Why do we eat latkes? Because they're made in oil. So it's reminiscent of the miracle of the oil. I'm sure that if you put a wick in a latke, it would last for 8 years, not 8 days. So, okay, so we eat a bunch of oil, and remember the miracle of the oil. You can say the same thing about jelly donuts. They're deep fried, so also reminds us of the miracle of the oil. But there's something much more significant about the message of a jelly donut. And that is, it's not mainly what's on the outside, but the main thing is what's on the inside. And that is the message of Chanukah. We should all have a happy and lichtige Chanukah, and now at least have something more to think about of what the message of Chanukah is, and even what the message of the jelly donuts are.